If you had walked past Willowbrook Park that morning, you might have thought everything was normal. You would have heard kids laughing, birds chirping, a lawnmower buzzing in the distance. But if you stopped just for a second and looked under the old oak tree by the playground, you would have seen it. A shape still, a presence too heavy, a dog that didn't move, and a crowd that should have known better. Jake Patterson was 5 years old, the kind of 5-year-old who still believed in superheroes, bedtime kisses, and the magic of animal crackers. He clutched his mom's hand tightly as they entered the park, his sneakers kicking up dry leaves. "Mama," he whispered, pointing toward a group of grown-ups gathering near the tree. "Why are they looking over there?" Sarah Patterson followed, her son's gaze, and frowned. The crowd was murmuring, not friendly chatter but sharp whispers, condemning, dismissive. Some of the neighbors, she recognized Mrs. Henderson with her perfectly ironed blouse, Mr. Peterson from the hardware store. Even the mailman had stopped, arms crossed like he was watching something illegal. "That thing is dangerous," Mrs. Henderson snapped, loud enough for Sarah and Jake to hear. "Someone needs to call animal control. Look at its face, up like it's been in fights." Jake pulled away slightly, curious now. He stood on tiptoes, peeking through the adults. That's when he saw it. A large German shepherd lay at the base of the oak tree. Its fur was patchy, caked with dirt and dried blood. One ear drooped awkwardly, and its eyes cloudy grayish, almost ghost-like, stared at the ground. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. It just existed, quietly, like it didn't want to be noticed, except it was. The grown-ups hurled cruel words, as if the dog couldn't hear them. But Jake noticed its ears twitch every time someone raised their voice. "Mama," he said softly, tugging her sleeve. "The doggy looks sad." Sarah knelt beside him. "Sweetheart, that dog might be sick. It's best we stay away." But Jake didn't look away. He couldn't. Something about the dog felt wrong. Not in the scary way, in the lonely way. "It's been there for 3 days," Mr. Peterson muttered. "My kids won't even play near it anymore." Jake's heart clenched. Someone laughed. "I threw a stick at it yesterday. Didn't even flinch. Thing just stared like it's already dead." Jake felt his face go hot with anger. "Come on, Jake," Sarah said, trying to guide him toward the swings. But his feet didn't move, and that's when it happened. The German shepherd lifted its head slowly and looked at Jake. For one long moment, the boy's bright blue eyes met the dog's dim gray ones, and something passed between them. Not words, not thoughts, just understanding. The dog wagged its tail, barely a tiny flick so faint, Jake almost thought he imagined it. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered. "Mama," he wagged at me. Sarah looked, but the dog had lowered its head again. "I don't think so, honey. Dogs like that don't usually," he did, Jake said. "He knows I'm not mean like them." The crowd slowly dispersed, still tossing barbed comments behind them. But Jake kept glancing back. The German shepherd never took its eyes off him. Jake reached into his pocket. "Mama, can I give him my crackers?" "No, Jake," Sarah said firmly. "We don't know that dog. It could bite, but he's hungry. Look how skinny he is." And he was. The dog's ribs stuck out like old fence posts, and his hips jutted beneath what little fur remained. Sarah hesitated. Her instincts screamed to protect Jake, but her heart ached at the sight. Still, she shook her head. "Let's just play, okay?" For the next hour, Jake went through the motion slides, jungle gym, swings, but his mind was still under that tree. The dog didn't move. Not once. Not to drink from a puddle, not to lie in shade, just lay there, breathing, waiting. Other kids came and went. Each time a child approached too close, a parent would yank them back. "Don't go near that thing, Emma. It looks vicious." But Jake saw something they didn't. Every time someone yelled or threw something, the dog would shrink smaller. He never barked, never snapped, just closed his eyes, like he was waiting for the world to forget him. Sarah stood from the bench. "Time to go, Jake." His shoulders sagged. But as they walked toward the exit, Jake made a decision. He reached into his pocket again and pulled out the packet of cheese crackers. Then, without a word, he sprinted toward the tree. "Jake, no!" Sarah shouted, but he was already there. The German shepherd lifted its head slowly. Up close, Jake could see more cuts, bruises, what looked like burns. His eyes weren't just cloudy, They were ancient, full of sorrow. "Are you hungry?" The dog didn't flinch, didn't growl, just looked. Jake opened the crackers, knelt down, and held one in his palm. The dog stared. Then so slowly, it was like time paused, he leaned forward and gently, so gently, took the cracker from Jake's hand. His tongue was warm. His teeth never touched skin. "You're not mean," Jake smiled, offering another. "You're just hurt." For the first time in days, the dog's tail gave a real wag. Not a flick, a full, sweeping wag. Like a "Thank you, Jake." Sarah arrived breathless. But she froze when she saw her son's face. He was glowing. Peaceful. "He didn't hurt me, Mama." He was careful, like he didn't want to scare me. Sarah looked down and the German Shepherd looked up. Not at her, into her, not begging. Just hoping, double quotes, "Please, Mama, can we bring him more food tomorrow?" Sarah was torn. Her instinct was still no. But something in the dog's eyes stayed with her. Before she could answer, Mr. Peterson reappeared. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked. "That animal is dangerous." The German Shepherd shrank again. Jake stepped forward, arms out like a tiny shield. "He's not dangerous, he's sad. We'll see how sad he is when animal control takes him away." Peterson snapped. Jake dropped the remaining crackers by the dog's feet before Sarah whisked him away as they walked. Jake kept looking back. The German Shepherd was slowly, carefully eating the rest of the crackers. But in his eyes, Jake saw it. The flicker of hope, the fear of losing it again. Hey, if this story has already touched your heart, take a second to subscribe to Heroes for Animals. We share powerful, true stories about animals who change lives and the humans who believe in them. That night, as Sarah tucked Jake into bed, he was quiet. "Mama," he whispered. Double quotes, "Yes, baby. What if the doggy has nowhere to sleep tonight? What if it rains?" Sarah hesitated. "I'm sure he'll find a safe spot. But what if he doesn't? What if those people come back and throw stuff again?" She tried to reassure him, but her voice trembled, because truthfully, she didn't know. Jake rolled over, silent. But sometime after midnight, long after the house had gone quiet, he whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow, I'm going back." Jake was up before the sun. He hadn't needed an alarm clock. He hadn't needed a nudge from his mom. His eyes had snapped open just after 5:30 a.m., and his thoughts were instantly with the German Shepherd under the oak tree, or, as Jake now called him, Storm. The name had come to him in the middle of the night, just before he drifted off. Something about the dog's eyes, the way they looked like swirling clouds, sad but deep, powerful. Storm didn't feel like a scary name. It felt like strength waiting to return. In the kitchen, Jake stuffed a half peanut butter sandwich and a fresh pack of crackers into his backpack. He even tossed in his favorite stuffed animal, Mr. Bear, just in case Storm needed company. When Sarah finally wandered into the kitchen, hair tied back, clutching her coffee like it was a lifeline, Jake was already dressed. "Morning," she said, eyeing her unusually prepared son. "You're up early. Can we go to the park today?" Jake asked immediately, his eyes wide with hope. Sarah froze. She'd been hoping he'd forgotten, but no such luck. "I thought we might go to the mall," she said gently. "That new toy store opened, Mama," Jake interrupted. "Storm's waiting for me." She sighed. "Jake, that dog probably isn't there anymore." Jake's face said otherwise. "Please, just to check. Just for a little bit." Sarah knew she was losing the argument. Jake had inherited her stubborn streak. "Fine," she said. "But we're only passing through on the way to the store. We're not staying long, and we're definitely not bringing him home." Jake lit up like a Christmas tree. "Can I bring him more crackers?" "Jake, just one pack," he pleaded. Sarah gave in with a reluctant nod. "One, but stay close." 20 minutes later, they stepped through the gates of Willowbrook Park. The wind carried that same warm early autumn scent, fallen leaves, cut grass, and something faintly sweet. Jake's eyes darted toward the oak tree. He whispered, tugging Sarah's hand. The German Shepherd was still there. Same spot, same position. But he looked worse, thinner, and now Jake could see something new: scratches across his muzzle, and a dark spot near one ear that looked like dried blood. Someone hurt him, Jake breathed. Before Sarah could stop him, he was running toward the tree. "Jake," she called, but her voice barely reached him. The dog looked up at the sound, and when Jake dropped to his knees and spoke softly, Storm's ears lifted. His body shook slightly as he struggled to sit straighter, like he wanted to appear strong. For his small visitor, "Oh no," Jake whispered. "What happened to your face?" He reached slowly into his bag and pulled out the crackers and sandwich. This time, he scattered the crackers on the grass between them. "They're all for you," he said gently. "I brought enough." The dog sniffed the air and then inched forward. Every step looked painful. He was limping, favoring his left. Front paw. Sarah, who'd stayed at a distance, finally approached. His paws bleeding, Jake called over his shoulder, "Mama, walk!" Sarah walked closer and immediately saw it's red, raw, and clearly painful. Her heart cracked a little. It was one thing to ignore a healthy stray. This was something else. Double quotes. "Oh, you poor thing," she murmured. Kneeling beside her son, the dog froze at her movement. His body tensed, as if expecting to be hit. But when Jake placed a comforting hand on his side, the dog relaxed just slightly. "Okay," Jake whispered to him. "She's nice. She helps me when I'm hurt, too." Sarah looked at the dog more carefully now. He was scared of adults, but not of Jake. With Jake, he seemed to find peace. "What should we call him?" Jake asked suddenly. "He needs a name." "Jake, we're not keeping just for now," Jake insisted. "Names are important." Sarah studied the dog. There was something noble about him, even beaten and injured like this. "How about Rex?" Jake wrinkled his nose. "Too normal. He's special. Look at his eyes." And then Jake said it. "Storm." The moment the word left his mouth, something changed. The dog's ears perked up fully. His tail started wagging, not weakly this time, but with a thump-thump of real recognition. Then, impossibly, he took a step forward. Toward Jake, toward the name. "That's weird," Sarah whispered. "It's almost like he knows that name." Before she could finish the thought, they heard voices. Jake's stomach dropped. He recognized one instantly. "Mr. Peterson!" "There it is again," Peterson barked. "And now it's got that kid with it." Exactly what I was afraid of. Mrs. Henderson and two other neighbors trailed behind him. Jake stepped closer to Storm. Protectively, the dog lowered his head as if trying to disappear. "We called animal control," Mrs. Henderson announced. "They're on their way. He's not a menace," Jake shouted, tears forming in his eyes. "His name is Storm, and he's hurt." Someone threw rocks at him. "Jake, come away from that dog right now," Mr. Peterson snapped. "No," Jake stood his ground. "You're being mean. You're all being mean." "Enough," Sarah said, firmly stepping between them. "We were just leaving." "No, Mama," Jake whispered. "We can't leave him. They're going to hurt him more." From behind the group, someone called out, "Animal control just pulled up." Jake turned and saw the white van approaching. His heart froze. "No," he whispered. Two uniformed men stepped out, holding catch poles and tranquilizer guns. Jake had seen them on TV. They weren't there to help. They were there to take Storm away. Forever. Jake ran to the dog and threw his arms around his neck. "You can't take him," he cried. "He's not bad." Storm didn't move. "Didn't." Growl just pressed closer to the boy. "Son, step away," one officer said. "That dog's not safe." "He is," Jake sobbed. "Look, he took food from me, gently. He doesn't want to hurt anyone." Jake pulled out the second half of his sandwich and held it out. Storm took it slowly, carefully, like he knew his life depended on it. The officers paused. "Ma'am," one said to Sarah, "we really need to remove the animal." But before they could step closer, something shifted. Storm tensed. Not at Jake or Sarah, but at the uniforms. He growled, not threateningly, but fearfully, a deep, rattling sound born of trauma, not aggression. "He's scared," Jake whispered. "He remembers them." The second officer hesitated. "You know? I've seen aggressive dogs. This isn't one. It's still a stray," his partner muttered. "Still our job." But suddenly, Storm's head snapped up. He looked past everyone toward the street. A man was walking toward them, slowly, deliberately. Gray hair, faded military jacket, weathered face, and Storm. Storm changed. His body trembled. His tail wagged wildly. He whimpered, barked, and tried to stand. "Easy now," the man called gently. "Easy, boy. Shadow," he whispered when he got close. "Is that you?" Storm no Shadow let out a sound between a bark and a cry and collapsed into the man's legs. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "You know this dog?" an officer asked. The man nodded, choking up. "Yeah, he's not a stray. He's my partner. He's Shadow, and he's been missing for almost 2 years." The crowd around the oak tree had fallen completely silent. Even the leaves seemed to hold their breath as the old man knelt beside the German Shepherd No. Shadow, his voice thick with emotion. "I thought I'd never see you again," he whispered, running his hand gently down the dog's matted fur. "My boy, what have they done to you?" Shadow pressed his body against the man's legs, tail sweeping the ground like a metronome of joy. His cloudy eyes shone with something Sarah hadn't seen before: recognition, relief. Love. Jake stood just behind them. You're his person." The old man turned. "Yes, name's Thomas Mitchell, retired canine officer. And this boy here," he stroked Shadow's head, "was my partner for 8 years. The best dog I ever worked with, the animal control." Officers exchanged uneasy glances. "Sir, if that's true, we'll need to confirm I have photos ID, even his chip. You scan him, you'll find it registered to me." One officer pulled out a handheld scanner, slowly approaching Shadow. The dog tensed again, not at the man, but at the device. Thomas placed a steadying hand on his back. "It's okay, boy. They're not here to hurt you now." A beep, then a click. Shadow's information lit up the screen. Name Shadow, handler, Thomas E. Mitchell. Department, Marion County Police Canine Unit. Retired status, missing since June 24th, 2021. "Holy," the officer mumbled. Jake looked at his mom. "He really was a hero, Mama." Thomas smiled gently. "Still is. Son, looks like you helped bring him home." They moved to a picnic bench near the tree. The crowd had thinned, but a few curious onlookers lingered. Jake sat with Shadow's big head resting in his lap, gently scratching behind his ears, while Thomas explained everything. "I'd just retired when I got diagnosed with cancer," he said, his voice low and steady. "I was going through chemo, couldn't take care of Shadow. So I arranged for him to stay with another officer, said he'd watch him like family." Thomas clenched his jaw. 6 weeks later, I get a call. Bradley claims Shadow got out of the yard, just disappeared. "Did you believe him?" Sarah asked. "I wanted to," Thomas admitted, "but Shadow was trained. He never wandered, never bolted. And if he had gotten out, he'd have come back. He always came back." Jake looked down at the sleeping dog beside him. "You think someone took him?" Thomas nodded. "I do. Someone saw what he was worth. A fully trained police dog. That kind of skill fetches big money in the wrong circles." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the chest. "You mean like fighting rings? Or worse?" Thomas said. "Drugs, smuggling, security for criminal groups. Shadow wasn't just any dog. He was Tokter." Jake's hand froze mid-scratch, but he got away. "He found me." Thomas smiled softly. He sure did. The animal control officers quietly packed up and left after confirming ownership. The crowd finally dispersed, leaving the little group. Under the tree in peace, Sarah, still shaken, looked at Thomas. "Can you take him back with you?" "I wish I could," he said. "But I live in assisted care now. They don't allow pets. And my health." He trailed off Jake immediately. Sat straighter. "Then we can keep him." Jake, Sarah started. "I'll take care of him, Mama. I'll feed him, brush him. I'll learn his commands. Mr. Thomas can teach me. I'd be happy to," Thomas added. "And I've been saving money for 2 years, hoping I'd find him again. I'll cover his medical care." Sarah hesitated. Shadow lifted his head and looked at her. His eyes, wounded, worn, but full of longing, met hers. Jake reached over and touched her hand. "Please, Mama, he needs us." It was the same tone he'd used when he was 4 and found a baby bird in their backyard. Only now, it wasn't about rescuing something small. It was about honoring something great. Sarah took a deep breath. "We can try it," she said finally, "but there have to be rules. And if his health—" "Thank you," Jake cried, flinging his arms around. Her. Shadow stood, slowly, his body aching, but his tail wagged hard. For the first time, he stepped forward on his own. Not because he was led or lured, but because he chose to. That evening, Shadow came home. Sarah laid out blankets in the living room, while Jake fluffed up a pillow. Thomas arrived a bit later, with a small duffel bag full of old police gear collar vest, a notebook filled with Shadow's commands. "This one," Thomas said, holding up his hand in a specific gesture. Means sit. Shadow sat instantly. Jake's jaw dropped. Can he do tricks too? He can do more than tricks, Thomas said. He can track people across miles. He can sniff out narcotics, find hidden objects. He was trained to protect and to love. Sarah watched as Jake practiced hand signals. Shadow responding with slow but sure movements. But not everything felt right. Something in the dog's eyes, even when he wagged, still held a flicker of fear. Later that night, as Sarah made dinner, Jake sat cross-legged by Shadow's side with his picture books. This one's about knights, he said, but the dragon is actually nice. People just didn't understand him. Shadow rested his chin on Jake's knee, his body relaxing more than Sarah had ever seen. She looked on from the kitchen doorway, heart tight. They'd only known each other for 2 days, but it was clear Jake and Shadow had bonded in a way that defied logic. When Jake fell asleep on the floor, Shadow didn't move. He lay beside him like a silent sentinel, breathing slow and steady, tail brushing gently against the boy's foot. Around 2 a.m., Sarah was jolted awake by barking. Not playful barking, warning barking. She grabbed her phone and rushed. Downstairs, Shadow stood by the front door, body tense. Hackles raised. Sarah peeked through the curtains and saw it. The black sedan, parked directly across the street. Headlights off, no movement, but it was there Thomas, who had insisted on sleeping in the guest room that night, came down the hall in his robe. I saw it yesterday too, Sarah whispered. I thought it was nothing. Shadow's growl deepened. Thomas frowned. He knows that car. He turned to Sarah, voice grave. We need to call the police. 15 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up. The black sedan peeled away before they arrived. Detective Rodriguez stepped out, a tall, sharp-eyed man with a no-nonsense expression. He said, but it's clear someone's watching this house, and if they're connected to Shadow's disappearance, they may try something. Jake had woken up by then, confused and frightened. Are the bad guys coming? He asked. Thomas bent down. They might try, but we won't let them take him again. You hear me? Jake nodded. Shadow moved in front of him, sitting between the boy and the door. Still, solid, ready. That night, none of them slept much. Shadow stayed by the front door. Jake curled up on the couch. Holding Mr. Bear, Sarah checked the locks 3 times, and outside, unseen by any of them, the black sedan turned. The corner again, its headlights stayed off. But inside, 2 men sat watching, taking notes, planning. They hadn't come this far just to lose the prize. Shadow was valuable, and they weren't done with him yet. 2 weeks passed, but the memory of that black sedan never really faded. The patrols came, and when the officers were polite, professional, but they could only do so much. The real fear wasn't in sirens or uniforms. It was in the silence between them. The kind of silence that made Sarah check every door twice before bedtime. The kind that made Thomas glance over his shoulder when walking to his car. The kind that made Shadow growl at nothing and, Jake freeze. Listening. Shadow had become more than a guest in their home. He was a presence, a quiet protector, a living shadow by Jake's side. He slept near the front door, rarely venturing more than 10 feet from the boy. He barely touched his food unless Jake was beside him. His ears flicked at every creak in the floor, every rustle of wind against the window. But what struck Sarah the most was how often he stared at the street, waiting, watching, as if he knew the fight wasn't over. It was a Tuesday when the storm rolled in. It started like any other fall afternoon, warm and windy, with leaves tumbling across the sidewalks like little red dancers. But by 3 p.m., the sky turned to slate, and the first fat raindrops hit the windows like warnings. By 4:15, the power flickered. By 5 o'clock, it was out, and by 5:10, the storm had turned into something furious. Sheets of rain pounding the neighborhood, wind howling like it had teeth. Sarah stood by the back door, phone flashlight in hand, watching her backyard disappear behind a wall of gray. I'm going next door to check on Mrs. Chen, she told Jake, who was curled up on the couch with Shadow. She's alone, and her porch light's been off since the power went out. I want to come, Jake said, sitting up. No, honey, the wind's too strong, and Shadow shouldn't get his bandages wet. As if understanding, Shadow gave a soft, rumbling exhale, and laid his chin back on Jake's lap. Thomas, who had dropped by that morning and gotten stuck by the weather, nodded in approval. "He'll keep Jake safe," he said. "That's what he's trained for." Sarah grabbed a raincoat and umbrella that were laughably useless against the storm, then looked back at the living room one last time. "Lock the door behind me," she said, "and don't open it for anyone but me. I'll call if there's a problem." Jake nodded seriously. So did Shadow. Inside the house, Jake sat back down and opened one of his favorite picture books. He read aloud, doing all the voices, while Shadow listened, ears twitching. And the knight said, "Don't hurt the dragon, he's not mean, just scared." And the dragon wagged his tail like he understood. Shadow pressed his nose against Jake's shoulder. The boy giggled and hugged him tight. Thunder cracked overhead so loud it rattled the walls. The lights were already out, and the wind whistled through the gaps in the window frames. But Shadow stayed calm. He wasn't afraid of weather. He was afraid of people in the kitchen. Thomas clicked through a battery-powered radio. Emergency updates, flood warnings, a reminder to stay indoors. He was pouring hot chocolate from the camping thermos when he heard it growling, low. Focused. Thomas turned, cup half full, and froze. Shadow was standing stiff by the back door. His ears were locked forward. His tail hung motionless, thick as a rope. Jake stood behind him, whispering, "He's doing his police thing again." Thomas moved fast, stepping toward the window. Through the sheets of rain, he saw nothing, but Shadow saw something. "Jake," Thomas said, "go upstairs now, but take Shadow. Lock your bedroom door." Jake moved, but Shadow didn't. He was fixed on the back door like a statue. Then dash, crash, glass shattered. Someone had broken the small kitchen window. A hand reached in, fumbling for the lock. Shadow exploded. He didn't bark wildly. This wasn't chaos. This was precision. His whole body moved like a weapon being deployed. Jake screamed, "No!" The back door burst open. A man in black pushed through, hood up, soaked face half covered. He carried something in his left-handed device with a blinking light and a trigger. Thomas's eyes widened. Tranquilizer gun. Jake ran for the couch, but the man didn't even look at him. His eyes were on Shadow. He aimed the device, but Shadow moved first. A flash of fur, a growl like thunder. And then he was on the man, his teeth sinking into the man's wrist, knocking the weapon to the floor. "Get off me," the intruder shouted. Thomas lunged for the flashlight. Shadow didn't. "Let go. Not to maul. Not to kill. Just to stop. Just like he'd been trained. Then get away from them." A voice from the doorway, soaked from head to toe, clutching a heavy flashlight. Sarah had returned. Her umbrella was gone. Her hair clung to her face. She looked like a mother bear. She swung the flashlight hard. The man ducked, slipped on the wet floor, and went down hard. "Jake!" she screamed. He ran not away, but toward Shadow. He threw his arms around the dog's back. "Don't hurt him!" he cried. "He's mine! He's not yours!" The man scrambled to his feet, limping. "Now, you don't understand," he hissed. "We don't want you. We want the dog. That animal is worth more than a distant siren cut through the storm." The man turned to run. Shadow lunged once more, barking a real sharp canine bark. The man disappeared into the storm. Police arrived 5 minutes later. By then, Sarah had barricaded the doors, and Thomas had managed to comfort Jake, who clung to Shadow like he was the last safe thing in the world. Detective Rodriguez was first through the door. Behind him, Officer Martinez and 2 others scanned the property. Sarah's voice shook as she pointed to the broken window. "He came through the back, had some kind of tranquilizer." "We found it," Martinez confirmed, holding up the small device in a plastic bag. "Modified, military grade." "What does that mean?" Jake asked quietly. "It means," Rodriguez said, "we're not dealing with amateurs." That night, after the police had gone, Thomas sat in the living room with Shadow curled near his feet. Jake had finally fallen asleep upstairs, but Sarah was still pacing. "I don't get it," she said. "Why not just steal a different dog? There are hundreds of German Shepherds in the world." Thomas stared into the dark. "Shadow isn't just any dog. He's trained, elite. He can track scents days old. He's a living, crime-solving machine. In the right hands, he's a hero." Sarah swallowed. "And in the wrong ones, he's a weapon." Shadow lifted his head suddenly, ears alert. He stood, walked to the window, and growled again, but there was no car outside, not yet. Thomas walked over and drew the curtain shut. "I think," he said softly, "the people who took him never stopped looking." Sarah nodded slowly. "Then we don't stop either." Outside, 3 blocks away, another black sedan sat quietly under the rain. Its engine was off, its lights were dim, but inside, 2 men were speaking into radios, watching the Patterson house through binoculars. They'd failed tonight, but they'd be back. Shadow was theirs. At least they thought so. The morning after the break-in. The sun rose into a sky that looked too calm, like the storm had never happened. But inside the Patterson home, no one felt calm at all. Shadow was still on high alert. He hadn't left the window all night, occasionally pacing between Jake's bedroom door and the front entryway like a silent, watchful guardian. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, rubbing the sleep from his eyes and flipping through a worn leather notebook full of Shadow's old training routines. Across from him, Sarah sipped coffee she barely tasted, her eyes fixed on Jake, who was unusually quiet, picking at his cereal. He hadn't said much since the attack, and when he did speak, it was only about one thing. "We have to protect him," Jake said finally, breaking the silence. "Those bad guys are gonna come back. I know it." Sarah reached across the table, brushing his hand. "We're going to keep him safe, sweetheart. The police are helping." Jake shook his head. "But they almost got him, Mama. What if next time they bring more people? Or they sneak in when we're asleep again?" Thomas leaned forward. "Jake, you're not wrong to be scared, but you're not in this alone. We've got officers watching the neighborhood now, and Detective Rodriguez is putting together a plan." Jake's eyes lit up. "A plan?" Sarah looked warily at Thomas. They hadn't told Jake everything yet. Thomas sighed. "Yes, the police want to use Shadow to draw the bad guys out like bait, but safely. With backup." Jake frowned. "Bait. He wouldn't be alone," Sarah said quickly. "It'd be a controlled environment. They'd act like he was unprotected so the criminals show up and, then boom, they catch them." Jake went quiet. Shadow, lying nearby, raised his head as if sensing the change in the room. "That's too dangerous," Jake said. "What if they hurt him before the police can stop them?" "We'll be watching," Thomas said. "Every second. He'll have eyes on him the whole time." But Jake wasn't convinced, and neither was Shadow, who had walked over and rested his head in Jake's lap, letting out a soft, anxious whine. Later that afternoon, as Sarah spoke to Detective Rodriguez in the living room, Jake slipped upstairs. Backpack in hand, he knew what he was going to do. He didn't like the idea of Shadow being used as bait. Not even with police protection. He didn't trust it. He couldn't, so he decided to do what he thought was right. Run not forever, just until it was safe again. Shadow padded silently beside him as Jake packed granola bars, a water bottle, a flashlight, and Mr. Bear. "We're not going to let them get you," Jake whispered. "I know a place we can hide. Remember that treehouse Mr. Thomas told us about? The one in Miller's Woods?" Shadow's ears perked. "We'll go there. They'll never find us. And when the bad people give up, we'll come back." He zipped the backpack, slung it over his shoulders, and looked down at his best friend. "You ready?" Shadow wagged his tail, slow but steady. "Together." They slipped out the back door and disappeared into the woods. The hike through Miller's Woods was longer than Jake remembered. The storm had knocked down branches and left muddy patches along the path. Shadow limped more than usual, his bandaged paw still tender. But he kept going step for step beside Jake, never letting the boy out of reach. By the time they reached the treehouse, the sun was starting to dip low behind the trees. It was old, but solid, built by someone decades ago who'd hammered it together with real nails and real care. There were still a couple of old blankets inside, a flashlight, even a can of peaches someone had probably forgotten. Jake climbed up first, then helped guide Shadow up the makeshift ramp. He wasn't sure the dog could do it, but Shadow surprised him. Once inside, Jake set up a little corner with their supplies. He opened a granola bar and shared it with Shadow, who laid his head on Jake's legs, eyes closing at last. "This is good," Jake whispered. "Just you and me. No one can find us here." But he was wrong. Back at the house, Sarah hung up the phone with Rodriguez and went to check on Jake. "Sweetheart." No answer? His room was empty. Backpack gone. Shadow wasn't anywhere. Her chest tightened instantly. Jake? She searched every room. Nothing. Then she saw the back door was cracked open. Her knees almost gave out. Thomas. She shouted, "He's gone!" Thomas came running. When he saw the empty door, he didn't ask questions. He just grabbed his coat. "I think I know where he went." Meanwhile, in the treehouse, Jake and Shadow were huddled under one of the old blankets. The wind had picked up again, but they were dry and warm. Jake had even started to nod off when Shadow suddenly stood up. His body stiffened. His ears locked forward. "What is it, boy?" Jake whispered. Then he heard voices male. Close to close, Shadow growled low and dangerous. Jake peeked through the cracks in the wooden wall and spotted two men moving through the woods below. There, one of them said, just like the boss said, "Kid and the dog." In the treehouse, Jake's heart dropped. They'd been found. Down below, the men circled the base of the tree. "Kid," one called, "we're not here to hurt you. Just send the dog down. You can go home." Jake pressed against the wall, heart pounding. Shadow positioned himself between Jake and the ladder. "I'm not giving him to you," Jake shouted. "You don't get it, kid," the second man yelled. "That dog is worth a lot of money. He's not for sale." The first man started climbing. That's when Shadow moved, with a bark that split the trees. He lunged to the top of the ladder and let out a sharp, warning growl. The man froze. "He's trained," the second muttered. "Like really trained." "Yeah," the first man growled. "But he's also injured. We can take him." "Wanna bet?" Jake yelled, heart racing. "He's a police dog. He'll protect me." The man kept climbing. Shadow waited until he was close, then lunged. He didn't bite. Not yet. He grabbed the man's sleeve and pulled. The man screamed and fell backward, landing hard. His partner scrambled to help, but it was too late. In the distance, sirens back near the trail. Thomas had flagged down a passing patrol and led them through the woods. Sarah rode in the back seat, barely breathing. The moment the sirens rang out, Jake's voice followed. "We're up here." Flashlights illuminated the treehouse. The two criminals took off running. They didn't get far as officers arrested the men. Detective Rodriguez turned to Jake, who was still clinging to Shadow like his life depended on it. "You okay, buddy?" Jake nodded. "Shadow protected me." Thomas helped him down, and Sarah pulled him into a tight hug. "I'm sorry," Jake said. I didn't want them to take him." Sarah kissed his head. "You were trying to do the right thing, but next time, you tell us, okay?" Jake nodded. "Okay." Rodriguez turned toward the suspects. "Tell me who sent you." One of the men hesitated, then broke. "You'll never believe it," he said, defeated. "Officer Bradley. That's who hired us." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "I knew it. Officer Bradley Dot, the very same man who had been entrusted with Shadow. 2 years ago, the one who claimed he'd run away. Only now, the truth was starting to unravel, and they were finally ready to bring it all into the light. The courtroom was quiet, eerily so, the kind of silence that presses into your chest, thick and heavy, like the seconds right before a verdict. Jake sat between Sarah and Thomas in the front row, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. He wore a collared shirt and blue jeans, his hair neatly combed. But his eyes were fixed on the German Shepherd at his feet, Shadow, even in the polished courtroom. With its marble floors and arched ceilings, Shadow looked like he belonged. Calm, alert, bandaged paw, still healing but proud. He sat tall, like he understood the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about a dog, it was about betrayal, it was about truth, and finally, it was about justice. Officer Nathan Bradley sat at the defense table, his eyes downcast, his uniform now exchanged for a wrinkled gray suit. For months, he had lived under the badge, respected in the community, praised for his efforts to find Shadow after the dog's so-called disappearance. But now the truth was out. He'd sold out Shadow's unit, handed over information to a private security contractor that trafficked elite dogs for illegal overseas contracts. Shadow had fought back during the attempted transfer. That fight left him wounded and presumed dead, but he hadn't died. He'd escaped, and 2 years later, by sheer fate or divine providence, he landed in the arms of a boy named Jake Patterson. The prosecution didn't need theatrics. They had records, messages, surveillance, the testimony of the two hired criminals, men who were now facing their own charges. but had agreed to testify in exchange for lighter sentences. The case against Bradley was airtight. Still, the judge listened patiently as the defense tried to claim stress, burnout, a moment of weakness. But the weight of betrayal was too heavy to explain away. Jake reached down and touched Shadow's head. The dog turned slightly, just enough to look him in the eyes. "It's okay," Jake whispered. "You're safe now." Shadow blinked once slowly. He knew. When it came time for testimony, Thomas was the first to speak. He told the court about the day he found Shadow in the ditch near County Road 17. About the limp, the torn vest, the silent way the dog refused to leave the boy's side from day one. Then, Sarah spoke out about the break-in, the tranquilizer, the fear of losing her son, the way Shadow had placed himself in front of Jake, again and again, never asking for anything in return. Finally, Detective Rodriguez took the stand. He described the investigation, the leads that never made sense, the missing files, and the hunch that led him back to a name he once trusted: Officer Nathan Bradley. The courtroom was still when Rodriguez finished, and then, to everyone's surprise, the judge turned to Jake. "Would you like to say something, young man?" Jake looked at his mom, who nodded gently. He stood, walked to the front, and turned to face the room. But not just from bad guys. He saved me when I felt alone. He didn't care that I was scared or that I cry sometimes. He just stayed. He's my best friend. He paused, and he doesn't deserve to be treated like a thing. The courtroom was silent. Even Officer Bradley looked up for a moment, eyes red, jaw clenched. Then the judge spoke. "I think we've heard enough." The verdict came quickly. Guilty. Officer Bradley was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, stripped of his badge and all honors. He left the courtroom in cuffs, head lowered, never once looking back at Shadow, cleared, his service record restored, and something else too. A letter arrived 2 weeks later from the governor's office. An invitation. It was a crisp, bright Saturday morning when the ceremony was held in the state capitol courtyard. Rows of folding chairs lined the manicured lawn. Officers, families, veterans, and reporters gathered in quiet anticipation at the center. A small wooden platform had been built, decorated with blue and gold bunting, and a podium that looked too big for Jake, but just right for the moment. "Today," the governor began, "we honor a hero who doesn't wear a badge, doesn't carry a gun, and doesn't speak our language, but whose courage speaks louder than any words." Applause rippled through the crowd. Beside Thomas and Sarah, his shirt was tucked in, his sneakers were clean, but his face still carried that mix of awe and quiet determination that had grown with him since the night in the woods. Shadow, the governor said, served with distinction. He was betrayed, abandoned, wounded, and still protect an innocent boy. That kind of loyalty, it deserves more than a medal. From the crowd, someone stepped forward, an older man in uniform, with silver hair and a steady gait. He carried a polished wooden box. Inside, a gold-plated tag dot engraved with Shadow, Loyalty Beyond DUT1 below it. Honorary Canine Officer, State of Colorado. Jake knelt down, held the tag gently in his hands, and clipped it to Shadow's collar. "You earned it," he whispered. Shadow wagged his tail, once, twice. The crowd stood in unison, a standing ovation. Later that evening, as the family returned home, they found a new plaque mounted near their front door, a gift from the sheriff's department. It read, "This home is guarded by a Hiro." Thomas chuckled. Well, it's true. Jake beamed, and Shadow. He lay on the porch, tail thumping lazily, eyes half closed as if watching over everything, and yet, finally at peace. That night, as Jake drifted off to sleep, he felt Shadow's body warm beside his bed. There were no more sirens, no more nightmares, just a boy and his dog, safe together, finally home. 6 months later, the Patterson home looked different, not bigger, not newer, but warmer. The mailbox out front had a small brass nameplate now, engraved in bold serif letters. Shadow's watch. It had been Thomas's idea. After everything the town had gone through, the trial, the ceremony, the flood of media attention, they needed something solid, something lasting. So they renamed the house, not legally, not on paper, but in the ways that really mattered. People waved when they passed. Children walking home from school would pause and whisper, "That's where the hero dog lives." And sometimes, just sometimes, Shadow would be on the porch, tail twitching, ears perked, acknowledging their silent thanks. Inside, life had settled into a rhythm. Jake was thriving. He laughed more, slept through the night without waking up crying. At school, he had given a presentation about police dogs, complete with a slideshow. A plastic badge, he insisted, Shadow earned, and a round of applause from his classmates. Sarah had picked up her teaching schedule again, and Thomas was writing. He had started a blog called The Dog Who Wouldn't Run, chronicling everything from the moment they found Shadow on the side of the road to the dramatic showdown in the woods to the courtroom battle that had reshaped their lives. It had gone viral within weeks, thousands of subscribers, emails from veterans, messages from parents, even a request from a documentary producer in New York. And through it all, Shadow stayed the same. Loyal, quiet, watchful. Until one day, something changed. It started with the limp. The old injury that, won from his escape, had never fully healed. But now it had worsened. He was slower getting up. He hesitated on stairs. And sometimes, his eyes, those sharp, alert eyes seemed, clouded with something deeper than pain. The vet confirmed what they feared. Degenerative myelopathy, a progressive disease. No cure. Jake sat in the back seat on the drive home, staring out the window, tears silently streaking his cheeks. "He's not going to die right away," Sarah reassured him gently. "But we need to make him comfortable." Jake nodded, but he didn't speak. That night, he lay on the floor beside Shadow, whispering stories to him about space rockets and haunted treehouses and lakes made of ice cream. The kinds of things little boys dream of. Shadow didn't move much, but his tail wagged with every story. 3 weeks later, Shadow stopped eating. They tried everything: chicken, broth, even Jake's favorite peanut butter crackers. But Shadow just rested his head on Jake's knee and closed his eyes. "He's ready," Thomas said softly. Jake shook his head. "I'm not." Sarah wrapped her arms around her son. "I know, baby." They scheduled the home visit for Saturday morning. Jake stayed up all night on Friday. He drew pictures. He wrote a letter. And just before sunrise, he knelt beside Shadow and whispered something no one else heard. "I'll keep watching," he said. "You don't have to anymore." When the vet arrived, Shadow was calm, came with Jake's hand on his chest and a quiet "I love you" in his ear. The town turned out in full for the memorial. Local officers, rescue workers, school teachers, even the mayor. They held it at the town square, beneath the flagpole where Shadow had been awarded his honorary tag. Jake stood at the front, dressed in a tiny blazer and clip-on tie. He didn't cry. Instead, he spoke. "Shadow wasn't just my dog, he was my hero. He taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing, even when you are scared. He protected me. And now it's my turn to protect his story." The crowd was silent. Then they rose, every one of them, a standing ovation. In the months that followed, the Patterson family turned their grief into something bigger. With the support of the Sheriff's Department and several local nonprofits, they launched the Shadow Funda community program that provided care and retirement support for aging canine officers. The first grant helped a retired narcotics dog get life-saving surgery. The second helped a PTSD-afflicted soldier adopt a retired search and rescue dog as a companion, and soon, the fund took on a life of its own, drawing national attention, featured in articles and morning shows. Jake became its unofficial ambassador. In interviews, he always wore the same thing: a navy hoodie with a paw print on the sleeve and Shadow's tag sewn into the chest. "He was my best friend," Jake would say. "And now I get to help other best friends get the endings they deserve." One spring morning, nearly a year after Shadow's passing, Jake woke up to the sound of scratching at the front door. Groggy. He stumbled out in his socks and pajamas, and there on the porch was a small cardboard crate. Inside, a floppy-eared German Shepherd puppy with one blue eye and one brown. Jake's heart skipped. A note was taped to the side. "For Jake, every hero deserves another chance to love. Thank you for what you've given the world. Deputy Rodriguez." Jake knelt down, hands trembling. The pup licked his face, tail wagging furiously. Sarah and Thomas stepped outside, blinking at the morning sun and then at Jake's smile. "What's his name?" Thomas asked. Jake didn't hesitate. Echo. And so it began again. Not a replacement, never that, but a continuation of love, of loyalty, of everything Shadow had left behind. Every paw print, every scar, every story. Jake knew Echo had big shoes to fill, but he also knew something else. This time, he'd be ready. Not just to be protected, but to carry the legacy forward. One step at a time, 15 years later, the wind moved through the golden fields of Colorado like a memory. A small crowd gathered outside a new building just outside of Durango, modern, but welcoming. With stone siding, wide glass windows, and a carved wooden sign that read, "The Shadow Center for Animal and Human Resilience." Inside stood Jake Patterson, now 25, dressed in jeans, boots, and a dark green flannel shirt. His hair was still messy in the front, his eyes steady and warm. A small scar traced the side of his jaw, a faint reminder of a childhood he had never quite left behind. Beside him sat Echo, older now, his snout speckled with gray, but still alert. The dog wore a custom harness with a badge stitched onto the side. Not just for show, Echo was a trained therapy and tracking dog, and the face of everything the Shadow Center had become. "I was just a kid when I met Shadow," he said. "I didn't know what loyalty was, or courage. I just knew I was scared and that a dog who should have given up on people didn't." He paused, emotion tightening his throat. "He saved me, not just from danger, but from being invisible. And that gift, I couldn't just keep it to myself." The audience, made up of veterans, therapists, former canine handlers, and families, listened with rapt attention. Jake continued, "So this place, this isn't just a building. It's a promise that every animal who serves will be seen, that every child who's lost can be found, that no one human or dog gets left behind." Applause swelled. Tears weren't uncommon at the Shadow Center. The facility had grown from the little grant fund his family started after Shadow passed. Today, it housed a full canine retirement wing with vet staff on Satia therapy program for children with PTSD and neurodivergent needs, a canine-assisted search and rescue team, a story lab where kids could write, read, and illustrate their own hero. Dog Stories. Jake had made sure every room had soft lighting, calming color palettes, and photos of Shadow on the walls, not staged one's real moments. In the woods, at Jake's side, at the courthouse, every child who came in met Echo. Every child left with a paw-shaped patch that read, "Seen, heard, protected." Later that evening, after the ceremony, Jake sat on the porch with Echo curled beside him. The sun dipped low over the mountains, casting everything in amber. Thomas and Sarah had both retired nearby, and they'd been there at the ribbon cutting. Proud as ever, Jake pulled out a small leather-bound journal, his old one, the one he started back when Shadow first passed. Inside, his handwriting had matured, but his voice stayed the same. On the first page was a drawing he'd made when he was 11. A boy, a dog, a heart between them. He smiled softly. Echo lifted his head and nudged Jake's knee. "Yeah, I know," Jake chuckled. Shadow would have hated all the speeches, but the truth was, the work wasn't finished. Not even close. 2 weeks later, Jake got a call from a sheriff's office in Montana. They had a boy, 10 years old, nonverbal. Witnessed a traumatic event. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat. The only thing he responded to, a photo of Echo. Jake didn't hesitate. He drove through the night. Echo sat up front, head resting on the dash as the miles disappeared beneath the tires. When they arrived, the boy was in the hospital, curled into himself on the bed. Jake walked in slow, set down Echo's harness. Waited. Echo padded forward, gently placing his paw on the edge of the bed. The boy looked up, no words, but his hand reached forward and rested on Echo's fur. The room shifted, not magically, not suddenly, but it changed. A thread pulled tight between souls who understood what it meant to be scared and to be seen anyway. When Jake returned home, he updated the Shadow Center's wall of stories. He added a new one, the boy who spoke without words, and beneath it, a Polaroid. The boy. Echo. A smile. A few months later, the Shadow Center received a national award for innovation in trauma response. Jake was asked to speak at a conference in Washington, D.C. He brought Echo on stage. He wore the same flannel shirt, and he closed his speech with a message that echoed far beyond the auditorium. We talk a lot about heroes, but sometimes heroes walk on 4 legs. Sometimes they don't need a cape, they just need a chance. Shadow is mine, Echo is someone else's. Let's keep giving those chances. Let's keep showing up, and let's never stop believing in the kind of love that doesn't ask why it just stays. The story of Shadow didn't end in the woods, or in the courtroom, or even in the governor's ceremony. It kept going, through Jake, through Echo, through every child, every dog, every person who found strength in a story that began with fear and ended in loyalty, and somewhere in the quiet hours before dawn. When the wind moves through the Colorado fields, you can still hear the echo of Pause. Thank you for staying with us through this incredible journey of courage, healing, and love. Which moment in Shadow's story moved you the most? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in the power of animal heroes, share this story with someone who needs to know. They're not alone. Word count. Approximately 1,398 words. Let me know if you'd like a full downloadable version of all 8 parts, 3 cinematic image prompts, 4. This final scene YouTube end screen message, or pinned comment suggestion, a powerful video title for the complete story ready when you are